All right, right on time, 7 o'clock. Welcome. This is the special committee of the whole meeting for the 8th of March, 2022. Let's note the roll and stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Excuse me. All right, well, thank you all for coming out today. We're going to move on to public address of the board. And before we go, I'm going to read the script before we start that. The opportunity to speak to the board is provided for members of the public who have comments to make about business of the board. The board appreciates hearing from stakeholders and values their thoughts and questions. As the board strives to make the best decisions for the district, public input can be helpful. In order for the board to reserve sufficient time to conduct its business and to operate its meeting in the spirit of civility and decorum, speakers are expected to follow the following guidelines. Do not open pop during this president's speech. Address the board only at the time provided on the agenda and only after being recognized by the board president. Identify yourself and be brief. Your comments must be limited to a maximum of 3 minutes. The board may shorten this allowed time in order to conserve time to allow the maximum number of people the opportunity to speak. Please be respectful and courteous, and the board requests that you do not make statements that are personally disrespectful or condescending to members of the board or staff. The board typically does not respond to comments or attempt to answer questions during the public comment period, but we do listen intently and appreciate the input from our community. And with that, we'll start with Kelly Darby.
Hi. Good evening. My name is Kelly Darby. I've been a teacher at Westgate for 24 years. I'm here tonight to represent the Westgate staff. Westgate is the proud home of District 25's Integrated Service Program. For those who are not familiar with this program, it provides an opportunity for special education and general education students to experience a cohesive learning environment that simultaneously meets the needs of all learners. I had the honor and privilege to be an integrated service teacher the first year the program came to Westgate from Ivy Hill, and many years later throughout its history here. Tonight, you'll be presented with some options related to full-day kindergarten. One of those options involves moving the integrated service program to Ivy Hill. On behalf of the Westgate staff, I would like you to consider the following items in regards to the program at Westgate. The Integrated Service Program has been at Westgate for 19 years. It has become an integral part of our school culture. It is part of our identity as a school community. During this time, we have established strong collaborative relationships among staff, students, and the parent community. These relationships took time to build, and it would be detrimental to the Westgate community if they were broken. Friendships have been made, siblings of our students have chosen to come here to be part of the Westgate community, and the staff has worked diligently and passionately to develop a program that benefits all of our general education and integrated students. Stability and consistency is always what is best for our students, especially those with unique learning needs. This is even more important with the changing climate of our society and the challenges that we have faced in the past few years. Staff buy-in is essential, and the Westgate staff has built deep connections over the years that benefit all of our students. It would take years to replicate the depth of these relationships and the knowledge that we've gained through our shared experiences. We understand how to build upon the strengths of our students, parents, and staff in order to create an environment of acceptance and empathy. The instructional considerations are innumerable. Our entire staff, from our lunch supervisors, to our custodians, to our specialist teachers, to our administrative assistants, to our instructional staff, have worked together to create an environment and structure that is conducive to a variety of learning needs. This program impacts every aspect of our school day. Over the years, we've adapted to respond in unique ways as a result of the years of development and understanding. Our special education teachers and general education co-teachers work together cohesively as a result of years of development. Any movement of the program would require significant training and education for the entire staff and community. We know that space is an issue, but we ask you to consider the following. Four of our 6 integrated service classrooms are not full classrooms. Westgate needs renovations regardless of moving the integrated services program. We are willing to be creative in those renovations to keep IS at Westgate. We would love to start an open dialogue to problem solve together and come up with some alternative options. Thank you for the opportunity to share our thoughts with you. Westgate would not be the same without the integrated service program. And we are committed to working with the board as you make decisions about full-day kindergarten. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on, we have Britt Polaronis.
Hi, I'm excited again that we're still talking about full-day kindergarten. After looking at the information from the previous board meeting in regards to the numbers, I think we need to look at Ivy Hill, as the Westgate teacher just mentioned. They have the space. Why can't we put full-day kindergarten at Ivy Hill? That would solve many of the problems that we're faced with. We have the space, and the report says that you're going to continue to lose students at that school in particular. Another thought that I had was, have we totally looked into what the Park District can offer in terms of an enhancement or an enrichment program, maybe in the interim time period? I realize that funding this program is going to be extremely expensive, so I would like to ask that that also be explored. I know we're down to only a few options. I also do think, after just hearing that presentation, I didn't know about Westgate. My son was actually at Ivy, and Westgate was an option for him to go to, but we fought to keep our kid at Ivy because we didn't want to move him out of his home school. So I do think it's important that we take the learnings from the integrated programs and, again, keep kids at their home school when possible. There's always a reason for those programs, but the more we can keep kids at their home school, the more that can create that same community and that same environment. Thank you.
Thank you. And that wraps up our public comment. So we'll move on to the next topic of our superintendent report, and that's for essentially the reason we're here for full-day kindergarten. And Dr. Bine.
Thank you. And we're going to go a little out of order because we do have a consultant with us today. Jim Hobart is here from Public Opinion Strategies to review the report, the polling that he did for the board. The board does have a copy of Jim's slides, and those are available on board docs for the public as well. But Jim is going to share with us his research, his company's research, which we asked him to do in case the board's decision results in us needing to consider a referendum question in either the June or November election. We asked Jim to look at the June election. And so, Jim, thank you for being with us. I'll turn it over to you, and you can share your information at this time.
Great. Thank you so much. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here. As Dr. Botten said, my name is Jim Hobart. I'm a partner with Public Opinion Strategies. We are based in Alexandria, Virginia. We do polling on a whole range of topics. And for various efforts, we do national polling, we do statewide polling, and then for the past 8 years, I've done a considerable amount of polling on referenda issues for school and park districts in the Chicagoland area. And so what we did mid-February, February 16 through 21, we did a survey of 250 registered voters who are likely to vote in a June election. and that included 150 cell phone respondents. So 150 voters were reached on the cell phone, another 100 were reached on a landline telephone. Always ask a question about political environment. Would you say that things in Arlington Heights School District 25 are going in the right direction, or have they pretty seriously gotten off on the wrong track? This is a question we ask for two reasons. One, it gets people, it kind of eases them in to the survey. You're not starting right out with an education issue. This is actually a question that was developed by a prominent pollster back in the 1980s, and we ask it on almost every survey that we do. The other thing that is helpful is it gives us a good sense of what public perception of the district is just right up front. As I'm sure everyone in the room knows, it has been a what's the nice word? Maybe tumultuous time for school districts all around the country. So what this tells us is, hey, 48% say right direction, just 17% right track. So almost 3-to-1 in favor of right direction. And you've got another 34% who have no opinion. That 1/3 number is going to range between about a quarter and a third throughout the survey. There's a portion of the electorate, not surprising, it tends to be the older portion of the electorate who just isn't as tuned in to what's going on in School District 25. And the reason for that is they don't have students either recently in the school or currently in the school. Getting into the school district itself, one thing that we very often do is we ask survey respondents to give the school a grade. And so here, schools often use the letters A, B, C, D, or F to grade students. Suppose you had the chance to grade the District 25 schools. What grade would you give them? Again, same thing, A, B, C, D, or an F. And what we see is really strong grades. 67%, so right at 2/3 of voters, give the district an either A or a B, with 22% giving it an A, 45% a B, and then importantly, just 17% who are saying C, D, or F. You've got another chunk, 15%, who say they do not know. Another thing we like to do after we ask that question is look and say, hey, so who are the voters most likely to give, for example, over on the left side here, give the district an A? And we look demographically, soft Republicans, voters age 55 to 64, voters age 18 to 34, and base Democrat voters. So from a demographic perspective, those are the most likely voters to give the district an A. Who's most likely to give the district a B? Soft Democrats, those with a child in middle school, those who have a child attending any school in the district, and then voters age 35 to 44. Similarly, also ask a question, when you say the District 25 schools are better, about the same, or not as good as schools in other parts of the state, 46% say better, 36% about the same. So that gives you about right at 72% who are saying, or excuse me, nope, that's my math is wrong, 82% who are saying either better or about the same. Only 6% say that District 25 schools are not as good as schools in other parts of the state. So again, some really positive sentiments about the district, which is really important when we get into referenda campaigns like this. One thing that gives a really good sense of how much of a chance a referenda has to pass is how people feel about the district. You know, if back on the letter grade, if we had 35% of voters giving the district a C, if we had, just 15% saying better, 20% saying not as good, the rest about the same, it would be that much more difficult to pass a referendum. When voters have positive sentiments about the district to begin with, it just makes any type of referendum effort that much easier. Also ask folks to grade the buildings and the facilities. Would you give the campuses or the adequacy of Arlington Heights School District 25 building facilities? Again, a letter grade, A, B, C, D, or F for fail. 69% said an A or a B, with 31% A and 38% B, just 11% C, D, or F. One thing that's a little bit different with this referenda than some of the other, or potential referenda, than some of the other efforts that I work on is this is all about, or it's not all about, but this is primarily about adding something new in the district, adding full-day kindergarten. Sometimes when I'm working on these types of efforts, what it is it's renovating the school, right? It's updating the gymnasium, it's updating cafeteria, it's providing new materials for classrooms. There'll be some of that in this potential referendum, at least as it's currently drafted, but it's really going to be considered the full day kindergarten effort in terms of how voters perceive it. That's going to be the big driving force. And so from that standpoint, these numbers aren't, if we were 69% A or B and we were saying, hey, we need to renovate the school classrooms, that would be a little bit of a challenge, because what that tells us is, hey, people like where it is. They don't see the need, or it would at least suggest that we need to make an education effort to show voters where the district facilities are failing or struggling. Here, since we're more focused on that full day kindergarten, that isn't as much of a potential hurdle. And then again, top groups A, those who have children attending the school, age 45 to 54, dads, men 18 to 54. Tops groups B, older men 55 plus, age 65 plus seniors, and then those don't know, it's actually more likely to be younger voters, age 18 to 34, age 35 to 44, home renters. Again, as I mentioned earlier, it's voters who just aren't, due to their age, to their current familial situation, they're just not paying quite as much attention to what's going on at the school district. Another important question that's obviously one that I wasn't asking 3 years ago, but I'm certainly asking now: approve or disapprove of the way Arlington Heights School District 25 has handled the COVID-19 pandemic. Pretty solid numbers here, especially when you look at some other data throughout the country. 62% approved, 22% disapproved for the district. Really no difference in numbers between those who have a child and those who do not, and a little stronger with moms at 66%. So, after all that's gone on in the last 2 years, to be at 62% approved is a pretty solid place to be. And again, it's going to make a potential referenda that much easier. Not going to say it's going to be easy, but if we were at 40% approved, 45% disapproved, that would be that much more challenging. And now let's get into the proposals. So one thing that we always do is we like to ask as close of an approximation to what the actual ballot language will be. So you see this here. I'm not going to read all this, but you can look at it and say, this is pretty detailed, complex, legalese type of language. A lot of times folks ask me, why do you ask it like this? Why don't you make it a little simpler? Well, the reason for that is, it's two reasons. One, when you make it simple, as you'll see in the next slide, you get pretty markedly different results. And then secondly, this is a very close approximation to what voters are going to see on the actual ballot when they either go into the voting booth, or now, as we know, a lot more voters are voting early. They're voting by mail. So when they're looking at the ballot they get in the mail, this is what we're going to see. So we want to have to simulate that as much as possible. And you see here on slide 14 why that is so important. If we just ask a straight favor or oppose offering full-day kindergarten for all district families, 83% favor, 10% opposed, 54% strongly favor. You look at those numbers, oh my gosh, that's a slam dunk. But guess what? That is not what voters are going to see on the actual ballot. Instead, they're going to see what we just had on the previous slide, that longer, that legalese language that goes into the exact cost. And here you see the different result. Instead of 83-10, we get to 58% yes, 25% no. That's still a pretty solid place to be. Anytime where it can be over 54, 55-ish% initially, that's a pretty good sign. But still, it's a far cry from 83-10. The reason that it's important to be comfortably over 50% on what we call our initial ballot is that, and we see this on all types of referenda, school district referenda, statewide referenda, on a whole range of topics, whether it's education, whether expanding gambling, whether it's legalization of marijuana, you name it. It is very, very hard to move voters from no or undecided to yes. And again, this is very consistent throughout the country. It's not just a school district thing. It is not just a Chicagoland area thing. It's consistent throughout the country, is that if you're starting out at 58% yes, this looks like, hey, that's a 33-point lead. That's awesome. Really what you're looking at is you're looking more at like 58-42, 57-43, because those undecided voters, those probably no voters, they're ultimately going to be no voters. The big challenge is that 27% probably yes voters. Those are the swing portion of the electorate and are the ones that are ultimately going to decide whether the referendum passes or fails. Next couple slides. What this does is up top is just that straight favor or oppose full day kindergarten question. That's always going to be on the top. On the bottom is the referenda itself. So the reason we do it like this is because it's helpful to be able to compare, and it's helpful to see where that slippage is. One thing that we see is, hey, in both cases, this is not yet, it is not currently an overly partisan dynamic. Usually I'll be referring to the referenda here when I'm talking about these. Republicans, 55-31, Democrats, 62-17. Margin-wise, yeah, that's a pretty big difference. But for 55% yes among Republicans, 62% yes among Democrats, that yes vote is very, very close. And then independents are obviously falling essentially right in between at 57% yes. One general rule is that Republicans tend to be more tax sensitive than Democrats. And so when you're looking at a referendum like this, if you tie with Republicans, it's usually a pretty good chance that you're ultimately going to win. Because a tie means Republicans, maybe even tie with independents, and then you win with Democrats, that gets you to that 50+1 mark. So to start out at 55% with the Republicans is a pretty good spot to be in. Another thing that's really important in these types of efforts is age. That's really highlighted here. Is look at the difference over on the far right among seniors. So when we ask just that straight favor oppose question among seniors, 75% favor, 15% opposed for full day kindergarten. But then when we ask the referenda, right, where we get into more of the cost, 46% yes, 29% no. Seniors, like I said, it's going to be tough to move any voter from undecided to no to yes. With seniors on something like this, it's going to be even harder. So yeah, you look at that at 46-29. When I look at that, what that says to me, I look at it as 46-54. That 46% yes is going to be pretty close to your ceiling with seniors, but ultimately more than half of them are going to vote no. And so what that means is you need to do really, really well with younger voters. And guess what? That is currently happening. Men 18-54, 71-17. Women 18-54, 61-25. So the support is there. The question is what turnout looks like in a June election. Right now we have this modeled at 40% age 65 plus. If instead, if there's not as much of a get out the vote effort for the June primary, and you ended up with an election that's 50%, that's 55% age 65 plus, the math, as you can tell, gets a little bit harder. Also, I always like to break it down by those who have a child, those who do not, by dads and moms. And what we see, not much of a split between those who have a child and those who do not. Numbers are almost identical. 57% yes among those who do, 58% among those who don't. Again, when we say have child, not have a child, that's a child age 18 and under. So no child, that could certainly be a senior whose children have gone on, they're in college, they're out working jobs, they have kids of their own. So it doesn't mean they just don't have children at all. It means they don't have a child who's age 18 or younger. And then we see the dads a little bit more supportive than moms, somewhat surprisingly. 62% yes for dads, 51% with moms. Then also those who are attending a District 25 school to compare to those who are not. 19% did have a child attending a District 25 school, 69% yes, 51% among those who do not. What this shows is, again, so many times these types of campaigns come down to turnout, right? Who ultimately comes out to vote. Clearly, the most important folks that we can get to turn out to vote, if this does go to the ballot, especially in a lower turnout election like June, are going to be those who currently have a child attending a District 25 school. And then by grade, hey, this is why what I mentioned earlier, it's so important to be pretty high on that initial grade, is because, look, if they're giving it an A, 67-18. They give the district a B, 68-21. If they give it a C, D, or F, not a surprise, it's 35% yes, 47% no. Key swing group are going to be those don't know voters. Again, those are voters who don't know what grade they would give the district. Here, this isn't a case where I automatically see that 39% yes, and I think of it as 39-61, because there is so much just lack of knowledge among that group. That's a group where an education-focused effort does have the potential to move some voters in the yes direction. And then here is the facility grades. Again, shows importance here. If you give the facility an A, you're 60% yes, 66% if you give the facilities a B, C, D, or F. Those are voters in all likelihood. They're going to be really challenging to support something like this. And again, an opportunity with those don't know voters, because there just is so much that hey, as the answer suggests, they don't know, an opportunity for some education with them. So here's a really important group. So this is the 27% of the electorate who says that they favor full-day kindergarten, but then they're not voting yes on the potential referenda language that was read to them. Who are those voters? 43% are voters age 65 plus. That's going to be a tough group to get. But where are there some opportunities? 61% have a child. 60% are women. So these younger women who do have a child, so they're not the seniors, but instead they're a little bit younger, that's a group that if there were going to be some effective persuasion, they would be the best potential targets. Again, in campaigns like this, it's not like we're going to go from 58 to 70%. That almost never, ever happens. But if we can go from 58 to 61, that just gives you a little bit more wiggle room. Another thing that we always like to do is to be really specific about the money that's involved, right? So a question that we asked right after the ballot: would you be more likely or less likely to vote yes in favor of this proposal if you knew that the estimated monthly tax impact of the $60 million bond issue would be about $19 per month for every $400,000 in home value, or to make no difference to your vote? So again, we spell out the cost really clearly. And what we see is the majority of voters, 56%, say that would make no difference to them. 30% say it would make them more likely to vote, 11% less likely. But what's really important is that no difference number, that this isn't something that has an overly significant impact on voters. Then we also ask a three-part question about the district adding full-day kindergarten. If the district were to add full-day kindergarten, how should kindergarten be funded? Tuition should not be charged for full-day kindergarten. District 25 should cover all costs associated with this programming. That's 42% of the electorate choose that response. Parents should pay tuition for full-day kindergarten with a lesser amount charged to lower-income families. 30% choose that response. All parents should pay the same tuition amount for full-day kindergarten regardless of family income. That's 18%. 9% say that they do not know. So the natural question is, okay, how does that break down on the ballot, right? So the 42% who are saying that there should be no charge, it should be covered by the district, overwhelmingly supportive, 71-13. Those who say it should be less for low-income families, 60-28. So still pretty supportive. Those who are saying everyone should pay the same, those are voters who are opposed to the referendum, 37% yes, 46% no. So really tells the story how voters break down in terms of the various potential funding options. The classroom space. I heard this touched on a little bit earlier when I was listening to the public comments. And so what we said is two options for potentially creating the necessary classroom space for full-day kindergarten. Which one comes closest to your own opinion? Pretty clear split here. 43%. One option is to build additional classrooms at the district's existing elementary school. These classrooms would house the full-day kindergarten students. That's 43% of the electorate. 37% build additional classrooms at the district's existing middle schools. Move fifth graders to these new classrooms at the middle school. Full-day kindergarten students would then be housed in the vacated space at the elementary school. And 11% of voters saying they do not know. So a pretty clear divide, a slight edge to additional classrooms at the existing elementary schools. But again, it's not even all that close to 50%. So when I look at these results, I see what I would just call a divided electorate. One thing that is interesting to see is those who say additional in the elementary school, they're a little more likely to vote yes on the referendum. 68-15 compared to 58-27. Those who say they don't know, they're at 48% yes, 19% no. And then among parents, again, pretty clear split, right? We don't see 50% for an option among those who have children, among those who don't have a child, among dads or moms. So this is definitely an issue where the electorate is pretty closely divided. Also, when we do surveys on full-day kindergarten, what we like to do is always present, hey, the arguments that we most often hear on both sides. So argument for full-day kindergarten up top in the blue. It's the best way to prepare all children for academic success. They say that full-day kindergarten improves readiness, reduces the need for intervention, and promotes social skills. 54%, that's pretty close to that 58% number on the initial referendum. The other side, full-day kindergarten is simply too expensive, not something that local taxpayers should have to pay for, even if other school districts provide it. Private schools for parents who want to send their children to full-day kindergarten, 34% going with that option. When you look pretty consistently throughout the survey, it's pretty clear that there's about a third, maybe a little less, of the electorate who, hey, this is something that they're never going to vote for. And you see that with 34% choosing that option in the red. And then, not a surprise here, with those who go with Prepare Kids, they back the referendum 70-16. Among those who say it's too expensive, they're divided 44-38. A little bit better than I would think among those who are saying that full-day kindergarten is too expensive. But again, those are going to be your softer yes voters. If I were going into this, those voters who are already saying it's too expensive, they're not voters that I would necessarily expect to win. Much more my focus would be on the 54% who are saying that full-day kindergarten is the best way of preparing children. And then, who is most likely to say that it's too expensive? Breaks down about what you would think. Those who give the district a C, D, or an F. Older men, they tend to be the most tax sensitive. Seniors, those who have a high school graduate child, so they're saying, hey, this wouldn't apply to me. So that breaks down about how you would tend to expect. Coming to the end here, and then we'll open it up for questions and discussions. Again, one thing that we always like to do is to test messages on both sides. People who are supportive of full-day kindergarten, what would they say? People are opposed, what would they say? And see how effective those messages potentially are. The messages in favor of increasing funding in order to pay for full-day kindergarten and other improvements work quite well. 50% very convincing. Full-day kindergarten will mean significantly lower childcare costs and more opportunities for children from lower-income families to receive high-quality early education. So 50% very convincing, a lot of intensity there, and then 78% total convincing. And then right behind that, full-day kindergarten increased opportunities, provide play-based support services, 45% very convincing, 73% total, help provide high-quality social-emotional learning for early learners, 44% very convincing, 76% overall, and then many neighboring districts are already offering this. It's important for District 25 to do the same, 41% very convincing, 74% total convincing. So all of those messages work quite well. Another thing that we do is we break down the most effective messages by various key groups. Here it's Republicans, Independents, Democrats, age 65 plus. I'm not going to go through each of these, but one thing that's always interesting is, I mentioned those probably yes voters up at the front. That's 27% of the electorate, so a little bit over a quarter of the electorate, pretty sizable chunk. What message works best with those voters? Significantly lower child care costs, more opportunities for children from lower income families to receive higher quality education. 55% of probably yes voters find that message very convincing. The other three work pretty well too, but it's clear which one is number one with that key group. Also, as I mentioned, test messages on the other side. So these are what you might hear from someone who's against this referendum. We're just beginning to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. Prices of consumer goods are increasing rapidly. It's the wrong time to be increasing taxes in order to pay for full-day kindergarten. 56% of voters find that convincing. 43% do not. 25% very convincing. So yeah, you have a majority that find it very convincing, but the numbers are lower, especially on intensity, than what you saw for some of the messages in support. And then this second message, very similar to what we tested in that head-to-head argument, and you see that a majority of voters, 52%, actually say that that message is not convincing. So after voters hear messages on both sides, they hear some more details about the proposal. We ask what we call our informed ballot, which is on the right. We go from 58% yes, 25% no, to 65% yes, 22% no. What's always important to see is that boost in intensity, going from 31% definitely yes to 40% definitely yes. 65%, I see that as the ultimate ceiling, right? But the fact that you do see some movement from the initial ballot to the informed ballot is important. It shows the strength of the messages and that voters are more likely to be persuaded to vote for this once they learn some new information. Who are those voters who are moving to definitely yes? A little more likely to be Democrats. Just over half have a child, 54%, and then just under half, 46%, are voters who give the district a grade of a B. And then the bottom line, couple things jump out. Look, this potential referendum starts out in solid shape. A June campaign, any type of primary type campaign, when you're not going in November of an even year, is going to require an aggressive turnout effort that maximizes turnout among younger voters, especially parents. If you get into a situation where you're looking at a majority of the electorate, so over 50% being age 65 plus, things get that much tougher. Strong messages that we tested. There is a little bit of an opportunity for a potential persuasion campaign here. Who are those messages most effective with? Women, Democrats, and voters age 45 to 54. And then, as I mentioned earlier on in the presentation, look, the district does receive high marks from voters. It's a positive when it comes to passing a referendum. And so a strong turnout-focused campaign that emphasizes how full-day kindergarten will serve to improve what is already perceived as a strong district will give the referendum the best chance of passing. And so with that, I'm happy to turn it over for questions from folks. I'm not sure the best way for it to work, if folks go up to a microphone, if they pass the question to Dr. Bynum and she asks them to me, but happy to answer additional questions that folks might have.
All right, thanks, Jim. Chris, I think he can hear all the board members, right? Okay.
Mr. President. Hey, Jim, thank you so much for putting this together. There's an incredible wealth of information. I know Brian Cerniglia would just absorbs this level of information. So just maybe one thing you can hone in, and you touched on it a couple times, is what is if you know, the voter turnout anticipate, just looking at a June type of election versus a November, because even with if I recall correctly, even with a village of, whatever it is, 75,000 people, the amount that actually turn out to vote is substantially less. So do you by chance know what those numbers are? And then, highlighting.
Yeah, so I would say there's two things to say. One is the big X factor is that, as you all know, in the state has moved from primary elections tending to be in March, April to June. So that's a new thing, right? So we can't be, if we were looking at a March or an April election, we could say, hey, this is what it was the past 3 years. Here's the average. Let's take into account, what's on the ballot, and I could have a pretty good idea. June, look, the best predictor of, regardless of changes to the election, the best predictor of past, or the next time you're going to vote is if you voted before, right? So the easiest thing to do is look at past primary voting history, see how many people voted probably in the 2018 primary election, and that's going to be a reasonable approximation. But I think the most important thing to know, and the one thing that I can say with 100% confidence, is that in November, we were talking about, hey, who's the least supportive of both this referendum and really any type of education referendum? It's seniors. One thing that we can 100% say is that a November electorate is going to be a younger electorate than a June electorate. That is just 100% the case. So look, there are always timing issues. Obviously, if you pass something in June, that means it can happen that much quicker. And so I am certainly sensitive to and understand that. But it is very difficult to imagine that a November electorate wouldn't be a younger and, in all likelihood, more friendly electorate than what you're seeing in a June primary.
Any other questions? All right. Thanks, Jim. Dr. Bide?
Yeah, and thank you all very much. And yeah, the district administration has my contact information, so if additional questions pop up, please don't hesitate to contact me. Really appreciate you all having me involved in this.
Yeah, thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to switch over to a different presentation. Again, thank you for bearing with us if we kind of went out of order so that Jim could present his information. There we go. So as we move forward tonight, we're going to share this information with the board. You've just heard the public opinion strategies results. We'll share some information that you've seen in a kind of a part 2 enrollment study about the impact of full-day kindergarten on our enrollment. We'll review where we're at in terms of some facilities formats for hosting full-day kindergarten. We will have a couple of slides from the Department of Student Services, just a really high view picture of the financial impact of inclusion, plus the plan that they have in place to study inclusion throughout the district. We'll share a little bit about financing options, some timeline considerations for the board, a communications plan that we would put in place, and some alternate plans should full-day kindergarten not be a decision of the board, or should we want to do it in some alternative ways. So enrollment study number 2, I'll send this over to Brian Kay to update the board.
I think you'll be happy to know I have 60 fewer slides on enrollment. So the first page, on page 6, from Dr. Casarda again, he looked at the anticipated number of students that we would be bringing into the district if we did start full-day kindergarten, not next year, but the year after. So he looked at the reason parents in this community choose full-day kindergarten. There are 3 reasons there: faith-based instruction, specific curriculum or environment, or a need for daycare. The enrollment impact that we anticipate noticing over a 3-year period. The first year, he would anticipate the impact would be about 85% of what we should expect when it's full. The second year of implementation, he anticipates it would be about 95%. And then year 3, he anticipates we'd have 100% of what we would expect the new enrollment to be, going from a part-day or half-day program to a full day. And he again provided the 3 series projections, A, B, and C. On the next slide, you will see on page 7, I've provided only Series B for you to look at, and that is the as anticipated number. For the year 23, 24, the first year we would be looking at potentially having a full-day kindergarten program, we would anticipate an additional 88 kindergarten students. Currently, with a half-day program, we would anticipate 481 students. Add the 88, we'd be at 569. That would be, again, 85% of what we anticipate the full impact to be. In the second year of the program, we anticipate it would rise to 97 students, and then in the third year, or 100%, we anticipate 101 students, and then that would be anticipated to continue into the future. So you can see in that chart, the status quo is the half-day program, the additional K would be the impact of going full, and then the total number on the far right. If you were to have Series C up here, the larger than anticipated, it's an additional 24 to 25 students. If we were to look at the max capacity in Series C, but we don't use that. We use Series B to base our projections.
Thank you, Brian. You can hand that over to Ryan, who's going to do some updated information for the board about the various scenarios we left as a part of our discussion last time.
Good evening. So tonight we're just going to kind of rehash where we're at with the scenarios and some of the updated scenarios that we had discussed at the last meeting. So primarily the newer ones are what we now consider 1C. But again, the first ones are, again, all neighborhood school-based scenarios. 1A is building on at all 7 elementary schools for the capacity of kindergarten only. Again, that was in an earlier study that we did. Again, just looking at kindergarten classrooms that were needed, not looking at overall building enrollment, and just adding kindergarten classrooms to supplement that. Option 1B is only adding on the full-day K enrollment. So I think that a lot of this at the full-day enrollment where it's needed, again, just for the K, not taking in the sections that, again, are needed for the current demographic study and things like that. And then finally we get into 1C. This is where we started talking about building capacity and extra needs at the buildings to make them more comfortable for the long term. So the first scenario is 1C1, and that's adding in elementary schools, and the programs remain at the existing schools. And then this, again, would give the buildings 85% capacity of usage of classrooms and 15% left over for other program needs and extra space in case there's a section bump a certain year. And then 1C2 is added elementary schools and then relocate programs to available spaces, and that's primarily, again, what we've been talking about initially tonight with the move of the IS program from Westgate to Ivy Hill because of the enrollment dip that we see coming for Ivy Hill. And then the final scenario is scenario 3. Again, the other ones we kind of excluded at this point based on past conversations, 2, 4, and 5. And then the final one is option 3, that's 5th grade additions at Thomas and South. The pricing I did update a little bit to take into account some things with gymnasium spaces, some things that we see with fees, stuff like that. It's primarily driven, the increase from the last meeting is primarily driven by the additional gym space that is needed at the facility. So just want to preface that before we get into it. Again, here's a summary of the costs. I do want to point out that option 1A definitely would need a rehash, so that pricing I would ignore at this point if we would go back to that. Again, it's just adding what the kindergarten classrooms are. We would, again, need to relook at Casarda. We just haven't done that at this one because, again, we feel Ivy Hill is not needed. So we would have to take that off and relook at the study of that. So I would, again, that pricing is not accurate even though it's up there. 1B, again, a price range of $24 to $34 million. That's the additions at the schools for the needs, and right now that would sit at 17 classrooms. 1C.1, additions at elementary schools and no program changes. That would impact 6 out of the 7 elementary schools. We would need 25 classrooms, and then select gym additions primarily at Dryden and Westgate. And then option 1C.2, that's the addition at the elementary schools if we move the IS program from Westgate to Ivy Hill. Again, now that would take Ivy Hill and Westgate off the table for additions, so it would lower the amount of classrooms that we'd need and the amount of schools that would be impact for classrooms. So we'd impact 5 schools, 15 classrooms, and select gyms. So Westgate, even though we wouldn't be adding any classrooms, we'd still be looking to add onto the gym. And then on the capital side, we'd still be looking to do renovations at Westgate that are not included in here again, but that's a long-term goal is to do renovations at Westgate for the existing building to get that up to a more current standard. So again, those are the options for the building at the elementary schools, and then option 3 for the 5th grade additions at the middle schools. The price range now goes from $37 to $47 million. Again, a lot of that variability is just the final layouts, the site setup, things like that. The unknown's kind of in the market right now. That's why there's kind of a variable. We just need to get that design more locked in on any of these to start getting more locked in on pricing to get the range tightened up. 1B, elementary school additions. Again, there's no program changes using the updated Get Started enrollment and study. I do want to clarify that we used in the enrollment study for this study, the kindergarten full day number, we just used the first grade enrollment number. So that would be the 100%, right, that we feel would be the max. So it's a little bit different than what Brian just presented in the true CASARDA study. But again, just to give us a buffer and make sure that we are covered for classroom space if it would ever get up to the first grade number. That's what we included for these studies going forward. Only adding additional K classrooms at the buildings and does not ensure extra capacity for programs and enrollment spikes. So here's the analysis of that, a real quick spreadsheet. These are the max K sections that we believe would be at each building or needed at each building. The current kindergarten classrooms, how many they are short, and then how many recommended new classrooms we'd use. So again, Ivy Hill, we're going to be short needing 2 classrooms, but we have the space available, so we wouldn't be building any additional space at that building. So the elementary additions, the K need only is at 17 classrooms. Again, just the updated pricing. Again, in that model, in that scenario, Westgate would still remain at 100% capacity because, again, we're just adding on for kindergarten. They're already at 100% capacity. So, again, moving forward, we just wouldn't have any space there for any enrollment bumps at that facility. So, again, the price range for this scenario is $24 million to $34 million. 1C1 is the elementary school additions. Again, no program changes. All the programs stay at the current facilities, using the updated Get Started enrollment with the updated kindergarten numbers, and then using an 85% classroom occupancy rate for an enrollment buffer. That's kind of the last meeting. That was kind of the number we all felt comfortable to start with, was the 85% number. This chart here shows the blue bar is the current classrooms available at the building. The gray bars to the right side are the sections that we anticipate at each of the buildings going forward. And then the red bar turns into be the, with the buffer, how many classrooms that building would need. So again, the comparison to get to the numbers, the big numbers on top, 4, 2, -8, et cetera, are the difference between the blue bar and the red bar. So again, the red bar is taking an average over the 5 years and giving it a 15% buffer. That's all it's doing. It's taking the gray bars, giving it a 15% buffer, and that's how it's coming up with the capacity increase at the buildings. So again, at Dryden, we would be looking to add 4 classrooms in the scenario, Greenbrier 2. Ivy would start out at having 8 surplus classrooms, but again, it could increase all the way up to 12 in 26-27 because of the continued decrease in enrollment at that facility. Olive, we would recommend 4. Again, the bars show 3, but one of the blue bars right now is staff lounge. So again, that's why we'd add the additional room to get to the 4. Again, if you look at the 2 bars between olive, blue, and red, it is 3. So we'd recommend the 4th room to give them enough space and so they could keep their staff lounge with the buffer. Patton, we would recommend 3 rooms. In this scenario, Westgate would require 10 additional classrooms. And one of the main contributors to that is they are currently at 100% capacity. Full day K with an IS room would come into play with that. The slight enrollment growth over the next couple of years. And again, just the IS program space needs in general for that scenario. And then Windsor, we currently are projecting 2 classrooms, and the only reason we're projecting 2 there right now is just per program needs for buffer space. We can look at that number a little bit further and see if that number could be 1 or 0. But again, for comfort level at this point with the enrollment of the other programs that are at Windsor, we feel it's best to recommend 2 classrooms at Windsor for that purpose. And again, that one is open to study yet. For layouts for 1C1, we start out with Dryden, adding the 4 classrooms, and then the yellow box above is the gym addition. Again, a reminder, they don't have a dedicated commons right now. So with the enrollment increase in kindergarten, just lunchtime and programs, it would be great to have an additional space available for dedicated for a lunchroom and for those types of needs for like a common space. So that's why the gym addition would be recommended at Dryden. Greenbrier would be 2 classrooms. The addition we put on several years ago, we kind of set that up already so the classrooms could fit and turn around and start making a courtyard. Olive Mary Stitt would be, it will be a difficult site to build on. We're looking to add 4 classrooms to the west. And if you're familiar with that, that's close to Arlington Heights Road and it's kind of low to the ground. So there's going to be some work to do there to make that facility look right in that area, and just make sure it fits there in the corner, because again, Arlington Heights Road is an IDOT street, setbacks, things like that would need some confirmation.
So in
But
that scenario, Ryan, we'd just wipe out that little playground that's there, right?
Yeah, probably, most likely, a majority of that concrete will be. We could maybe be able to fit it around the existing play structure, so it's going to get considerably smaller. We'll have to see how that lays out, if any remains, or if it gets offset, or things like that. But again, there's a reminder to the east, the other side, there's all the utilities that we've talked about for years. It's just, there's village, there's electric, gas, storm sewer, large stuff. Yeah, just like $1 million, like we've talked about before, just to get out of the ground. Patton Elementary School, where we'd be looking at adding 3. Again, works pretty well on that side near the field side, and kind of starting to close that off. A first pass at Westgate would be to add the classrooms to the south. We didn't place the playground a ways away a couple of years ago when we did the new playground set up there, because there was a potential always for a new addition. So we moved the playground away then. So we have the space to do it, but again, adding 10 classrooms, restrooms, ancillary spaces to Westgate. And then also at Windsor, we set the addition up in 2017 to accept the new addition going forward. So that's showing a general space where it goes. We'd probably work on that. We have the architect kind of drawing up some other ones where we'd move the 2 classrooms to the courtyard side. So then the future for building, we're not going over the top or things like that. So we'd start with the classrooms on the inside, build the hallway, and then we'd have the outside available to build additional classrooms. So we'll work through that on the thing, but again, 2 classrooms either way. Again, this isn't included. This is just an alternate plan to offset the amount of classrooms. We talked about, like, whoa, could we do a major construction renovation project at Westgate to kind of make it a little bit flow better, building setup, work better for the building. So again, we're looking at what we would do at the south wing of classrooms, demolish, reuse for something else. What would that look like? And then just kind of plotting it out where the 2-story addition would go on the site. Again, a lot of things would have to be worked out here, access to the office, parking, drop-off, stuff like that. But just in concept, that's a potential location where that could go to get all the classroom space up on the north, and then kind of have it hubbed back to the main section of the building. So again, this isn't included in any pricing. If this is the direction we'd want to explore more, there's a lot of study that would need to go into the pricing of this. So none of this, the pricing of this scenario is included in the slides. So looking at the pricing for that scenario, we currently have a price range of between $32 and $42 million. And then scenario 1C2 is the consider program location due to space availability. And again, come back to the Westgate IS program, relocation to Ivy Hill open spaces. That's the primary driver of what is different in this scenario. Again, using the same updated CASARDA information and an 85% classroom buffer to begin with. So this is the newest scenario on what that looks like. Dryden stays the same at 4, Greenbrier stays the same at 2, Ivy Hill would be 0 needed. So what that's showing is they would be at the 85% buffer. The 2 bars are matching. So they have the proper quantity of rooms that would be available to what that would be with the buffer. Olive, again, recommending 4, Patton 3, Westgate 0. We are recommending 0 at this point. They would only have 3, so it's a little bit short of the buffer. But at this point, we'd recommend that 3 open classrooms would be sufficient for the needs of the building, and where we see enrollment staying very steady for the next couple of years. And then Windsor still recommending 2 at this point in this scenario, but there would be an option to look at that again to make sure that the right number are built. Anywhere from 0 to 2 is kind of that sweet spot with the Windsor number right now. Just some potential layouts. Again, they all stay the same. The only changes is at Ivy Hill, we include some cost right now to build out some office space and small group space, just in case if we move the IS program up there and they need more, if they have more support staff, they would have some spaces to do that. We're not 100% sure that that will be needed. But again, for this initial study, we thought it would be advantageous to at least show it. Olive remains the same, Patton remains the same, Westgate not required in this option currently, and then Windsor, again, the addition would stay in the same spot. For this scenario, we'd estimate the cost to be in the range of $24 to $32 million. Again, final layouts will be the major impact, and stormwater management are the 2 biggest drivers of this on where the pricing comes in, on where stormwater management's needed, more than others. Mostly is going to be impacted on the sites that we haven't built on before. That's where our stormwater management costs are going to be higher. So we do have a lot of work to do with that, with MWRD, the village, our engineering staff to kind of get that up to speed on where that'll go for stormwater detention and things like that. So again, initial cost estimate for that scenario is $24 to $32 million. The middle school additions, again, very similar to before. The biggest changes are at South, we'd add a one-station gym section. So again, they have, I call it the auxiliary gym. If I'm calling it the wrong thing, I apologize. But adding one more station similar to that onto the gymnasium at South to give them extra space for the sections that they would need. At Thomas, I would recommend a two-station gym. The reason for that is right now the auxiliary gym is on the second floor of the facility, kind of far away from the fitness center and gym space. So looking to move that space down near the newer gym and then offsetting and build that space out with classrooms. So there's some potential we wouldn't have to build as many classrooms, say two, just by using that space over. So some of that cost would come down, but again, just if we're gonna be adding gym space, it's most likely the time to look at getting that off the second floor and getting it centralized with the remainder of the fitness and gymnasium spaces. It also includes a furniture allowance and updated fees on what we believe the most current market would have for fees related to these projects. And the total estimated cost for this scenario would be $37 to $47 million. So potential timelines, want to talk through this a little bit and get some input on design and where we're at before the referendum, because that'll help us in the long term. But a potential schedule here is we would start to approve more full design. Again, it's slowly paced. There's probably 5-6 months of full design to go. But start design on whatever option we want to go with before the referendum. So then again, some of the stuff will need to be used for the referendum, some of the drawings, some of the renderings. So it might kind of flow nicely that we'd have some of this information. There's always the risk though. If we start before that we're expending money, then it fails, the referendum would fail, the district's out the money of the design fees, and then we'd have a starting ground if we go forward again in the future, but it would have to be updated most likely. So again, would design start now, get us going before the referendum, and then keep working through with the village and that more in depth. We'd have initial conversations up to the referendum. When the referendum would pass, then we would get more into the final approval stages with the village, MWRD, and all that. But it would really help that we conceptual information before the referendum to have those conversations, so we're ready to go when the referendum passes to get going in the late fall, winter. So again, the initial thing is to get that going. If we would wait, there's still that potential that we could still hit the schedule with opening next year. It's going to get a lot tighter if we wait until June to initiate full design, but there's still the potential that we could get going. So again, in this one, if we get started in March, we keep designing, get village approvals, bid late fall. We'd probably do some light site prep and some mobilization over the winter months. Most likely not recommending like full construction over the winter just because of winter costs, gas, heating, things like that to keep for masonry. But then getting going mid-February, early March, and then being ready to go for the 23 school year. Again, tight timeline. We've done it before. Windsor was a great example of that. One of the later projects we got going. Talking with the construction manager, they feel comfortable with this as well. Again, if we wait on design, not insurmountable, but again, it's just more difficult to get the village rolling, MWRD, things like that. If we wait to start full design until June 28th or whenever the election would be. With that, I will turn it over to Mike.
Thank you. With the discussion of full-day kindergarten, it's important for us to consider the possible impact that full inclusion may have. And as part of the strategic plan, we plan to investigate our inclusive practices in District 25. And one of the things we would like to do in the fall of 2022 is have NSSEO work with us to conduct an audit of our programming for special education students. And part of that audit would be to include a satisfaction survey of families of students with IEPs, the extent to which District 25 is educating students in the least restrictive environment in their home schools, the extent to which District 25 is utilizing inclusive practices across all schools. Is District 25 including parents in the decision-making process for determining educational placements of students with IEPs? Does District 25 implement an appropriate process for determining special education eligibility? And how does District 25 compare to area districts with implementing inclusive practices? The Department of Student Services looks forward to the results of this audit, and the results will help us make decisions in moving forward with the strategic plan and implementing inclusive practices across the district. Additionally, we felt that it was important to give a conceptual kind of framework for when we talk about full inclusion, what that might mean in terms of staffing. And this, as Dr. Bine stated earlier, this is a very high-level view of what it could look like if we were to do a full inclusion type model. And when we say full inclusion, we're talking about all kids. So we're talking about students that are in our resource programs, students that are in our instructional programs, and students that are actually out of district placed in either public therapeutic or private therapeutic day schools. So when we look at this chart, the high level view, this is all the students right now that we have that receive special education services. So I want to make it clear that this isn't something we're recommending at this point. This is just a view of what it could possibly look like if we were to implement a full inclusion model.
Peg,
So-
does this include current NSSEO students?
Correct. There
Okay.
are students
Right, wait,
that are
yeah.
being educated at an NSSEO school. So
Right.
there are District 25 students, yes, as well as students that may be privately placed. Okay, so this graph is based on our current population receiving special education with implementing the 70-30 general education to special education mandate. So in order for a classroom to be considered general education, 70% of those students need to be general education without IEPs. So you will see how some of these numbers of teachers may change based on grade level. That's because we took into account the number of general education students there are at each grade level in each of those schools, along with the number of students receiving special education. And that's and the 70-30 mandate. So that's how we came up with these numbers. That's why you will see that they're different between grade levels, between schools. This would not necessarily increase additional classroom space because we would be able to have special education teachers and general education teachers share classrooms. This chart also indicates that we would reallocate the total of 33 special education staff that we have in the elementary only. We would reallocate where they may be, what schools they might be working at. But if you can see that it would mean that we would need an increase of 32 teachers in order to meet all the needs of the students that we have currently. This chart does not indicate an increase for related service staff, so speech and language, social work, psych needs, and it also we did not get into teaching assistants and what that might mean. Because when we have students that are currently placed in a public therapeutic day school and we would bring them back to their home school, we would need more TA support to help meet the needs of those kids in the general education setting. So you could see the estimated cost is about $1.8 million, 1.9, just for teachers. So it's important that we have this
Yes, thanks.
information.
Thanks. So what Peg and Stacy wanted to just give you again as a high view is what that operating cost could be for teachers, but also the understanding that Peg did reach out to NSSEO early this year and say, could you help us with an audit? And NSSEO is very happy to do that. They do that for many districts. They asked if they could wait till the fall because of so much that was going on this year. So that's all information that we just don't know at this point on what recommendations they will make for our programs, but we'll be finding out next year. And so the next information is some financial options from Stacy.
So as you heard from the consultant in the community survey, he talked about a $60 million, would the community support a $60 million referendum to get a number out there and get a sense of where the community was at. So in looking at what that would look like, our bond consultant provided this schedule, which is what a $60 million referendum would look like. In total, it would cost, again, at this time, which it wouldn't be happening, the bond sale wouldn't be happening right now, but $60 million would cost in total with interest and fees $81.2 million. The tax rate for this would be about 19 cents per $1,000 of EAV. So on a typical or average $400,000 home in our community, it would be $228 a year or $19 a month, which is the number that, again, was used in the community survey. Some of the numbers that you saw from Ryan, based on increased costs, totaled up around, and again, this is anticipating the cost of full-day kindergarten and our $38.9 million, I think that's the amount, $32.9 million of capital projects for the next 5 years. So at the high end of some of our numbers, we're looking closer to $81 million. So I did just ask her to give me that analysis as well. That would be $324 per year on a $400,000 house, which would be $27 a month versus $19 a month. I know the board has asked also about a plan for capital projects beyond. So while certainly it is Ryan and my intent to give the board a lot of information about where we're at with our capital projects, and that in a perfect world, we'd be spending around $6 million a year on our capital projects. We would have, if we're able to pass a referendum and incorporate the next 5 years, then we're really looking out at projects in our 26-27 school year. I'm sorry, summer of 26. So yeah, our 26-27 school year. This chart just shows, at that point, if we paid $3 million out of the $6 million out of our operating funds, we could, and this is just one example, we could then continue to use the debt service extension base, extend it out, sell something like $9.8 million of bonds, use 3 of it each year to offset the capital plan, and then 3 years out after that and pay it back quickly and just recycle those dollars. Again, just an option, a vehicle that would be available. Deferring some of the costs. We saw, $6 million keeps our buildings in tip-top shape. If we don't spend $6 million a year because we're comfortable with buildings in great shape, those are always things that we continue to look at. We continue to defer things. But again, just wanted to let the board know that there is a vehicle, at least one, that we can certainly talk about over the next 5 years of how to continue to work on that plan.
I want to make sure that this comes across clear for the board. The first timeline consideration. If our goal is to open full-day kindergarten in August of 2023, I'll be honest with you, everything has to happen right? Everything has to go well. Construction has to happen on time. However we decide to finance it has to happen. I'm an idealist by nature, and I believe it's a possibility, but I want to be transparent and clear that something goes wrong in the process, village approvals, construction, anything, it could delay that August of '23. And so if that were to happen, we'd have to be ready for, there might be a transition during that year. Maybe we're doing full-day kindergarten in a different way, and we have some examples if construction's not quite ready to open in August of '23. But if we want to shoot for that August of '23, here are some things that have to happen from a timeline. At the March 17th meeting, which is a regular board meeting, we would be asking the board if they're ready to vote on full-day kindergarten, and if so, if they're ready to direct us to move forward with preparation fees. So Ryan talked about, right, we'd need to do some more extensive architect and traffic studies. We figure that could be a $2 to $3 million cost. So it's important for the board to know, if you give us that go-ahead on getting that more detailed work of $2 to $3 million and a referendum doesn't pass, we've just spent $2 to $3 million, right? Which would give us some information for future, but would probably still have to have some edits done to it. And so there'd also be at the March 17th a resolution, if the board decides, yes, let's do this, let's put it on the June ballot, there'd be a formal resolution that the board has to vote on with the ballot language, et cetera. Because by law, you'd have to pass that resolution for the June election by April 11th. Currently, we don't have another meeting other than March 17th. We could always add a special meeting so that the board would vote on that resolution no later than April 11th, if we weren't comfortable doing it on the 17th. Because no later than April 21st, our attorneys have to file that resolution for it to be a part of that June election. June 28th is that gubernatorial primary election. And then we would, during 2022 and 2023 school year, be doing construction, staff training, working with our teachers to design what kindergarten, full-day kindergarten would actually look like. And with our plan then for August of 2023, having full-day kindergarten or transition, should things not quite be ready to open. Another timeline to consider, if we decided, well, we want to be, give ourselves a little more safe space and not have the possibility of a disappointment of everything not being ready as we'd like, we could plan for an August of '24 full-day kindergarten implementation. If so, again, at March 17th, we'd ask the board if they're ready to vote. The board would direct us to wait on those preparation fees, so that $2 to $3 million in fees. We wouldn't need to get them done so quickly, so we could wait and see if a referendum passes before we do that next leg of the work, right? And the board, again, could vote on a resolution in March. Again, there's the dates for the June election. And if in June 28th, if a referendum is approved that we're able to sell the bonds that we would need for full-day kindergarten and capital projects, at that point, administrators could move forward with working with our consultants on those more detailed preparations, so that $2 to $3 million of additional drawings and things like that. If it doesn't, if it's not approved, we could restructure our plans and start looking at the November election. Like Jim mentioned, right, a November election would typically have more of the voter turnout that would support. Again, we haven't done a June election in Illinois. We really don't know for sure. But so again, if it didn't pass in June and we still felt that was the way to fund it, we could be then restructuring our plans and working towards that November election. In that November election, should a referendum pass at that time, then we do our detailed plans, and we still believe that we have time to open full-day kindergarten by an August of 2024 instead of an August of 2023. So that's just two examples of timelines for the board to be aware of.
A quick question.
Mm-hmm.
Did you just say that you could put it on a June election, and if it didn't go, you could put it back on a November election. Is that what you said?
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
Okay.
And you could choose to not go on the June election and only go on the November election. There's, different perspectives. Consultants would say you never want to know, right? You don't want a no vote, because then you're trying to come back from a no vote. And yet there are many school districts, it's very typical. If you get a no vote, then you restructure your communications plan, your community grassroots work to get out the information, and you see if you can get more information out to the voters to then pass it a future time. Communications plan, this is just in your packet. It's not here on the presentation, just so you're aware. Our communications department is already really planning how they would get information out. We've actually got some dates set for when we would be able to have community forums. Our thought would be we'd have one at each elementary school throughout the months of March, April, and May, in the evenings or on the weekends, or when those are tentatively scheduled on our list, so that we could share the facts with our community and invite them to those to learn about the expected impacts of full-day kindergarten, the timeline from all the pieces that the board's learning about, construction, financing, training, all of that. The costs, financial costs to taxpayers, what some alternatives would be. They're also already working on a process for mailings to the full District 25 community, so not just our parents, but all of those who are voters within District 25. Again, a fact sheet and other ways to communicate that factual information. I've reached out to all of our partnering communities, the village, the library, the park district, District 214, to say that we'd like to send someone to a meeting there in March, April, or May to just share District 25's intent, to thank them for their partnerships to this point, but be able to say at those meetings what our plans would be moving forward. Any of our local organizations that reach out to us, we want to make sure we connect with them. Online communication they're working on as well as a dedicated informational page on our website that would give, again, people the factual information. And then Adam and Anana are continually looking at what other ways they might get the factual information out to our community. And then some alternate plans. So what are some other ways to possibly do full-day kindergarten, whether we decide to go out for a referendum to sell the bonds or not? These are some things to just be aware of. We could offer a lottery system, and wherever we have rooms available, that's where full-day kindergarten happens. For example, if you have 8 rooms at Ivy Hill, you could say we're going to have room for 8 full-day kindergarten classrooms, and everybody in the district who's interested gets their name in a hat, and you pull them out. And that's, no matter what their homeschool is, that's where full-day kindergarten happens. And maybe you have 1 room at Patton and 1 room at Dryden, and so that is an option. It would change each year, right, depending on where classrooms were available. So it might be that there's 8 rooms at a building one year, and next year there's only 6 rooms at that building, but there's 2 rooms somewhere else. So that's just an option. That could be a tuition-based. I think we really quickly looked at like a $3,800 cost, where half of your day is free, and then if you pay for the other half, it's about $3,800 a year. And we would suggest, if we're going to do something like that, that we adjust that for our families who qualify for free or reduced fees. We could be saying at that time that, but parents, you'd need to provide transportation, right? Otherwise, we could be transporting kids from all over the district to further locations. Another option for an alternate plan is a need-based enrollment. So looking at, thinking about some of our MAP data, we could offer it to students who fall in the low-income subcategory or the multilingual subcategory that we saw academic differences with. gaps in learning. That if we did something like that, we would likely recommend that we cover that cost out of our District 25 budget. Again, we'd have to see exactly how many students that we'd be talking about. But again, we know the research about full-day kindergarten, that it has its biggest impact when your at-risk students are in full day. That's when you see the closing of that gap with their typical peers. And we'd have to talk about transportation and whether families would be able to do that, or that would be a cost that we would also take on. Another thing, whether, like, if we're shooting for August of 2023 and we find out, oh, we have a couple buildings that, thank you. Keep going. Keep going. Oh, back one. Good job. Again, another option, let's say we're shooting for a certain timeline and we're just not quite making it, or we want to offer full-day kindergarten where we can, and we have some buildings that just don't have the capacity. We could look at utilizing this building right here. This building has what would be equated to about 19 classrooms. Again, it's not technically, am I right? Did I stretch that? Oh, okay. It's not up to code completely for a full-time school, but it could be utilized temporarily for a school. Things like the air condition. You know, the heat works great here, but the air condition might not be what you typically see in a typical school, right? We have air condition, we have, you know, but it wouldn't be as smooth and as a building might see. But it is an option that if we needed a year transition, whether for some buildings or for many, we could relocate Dunton. We haven't looked at the costs of that yet, but we could look into a smaller office space of some sort to get us through a year, should we need this facility for a transition time. Oh, thank you. And that's kind of a lot of information for the board, a ton of information for you to just think through. And I think probably what I would expect would be the best outcome tonight is to kind of know, are you still, as you have some discussion, are you still in the 1 ABC category, and I'm putting those together, or are you more in the option 3, moving 5th grade category? We may not be able to get between 1A, B, and C yet, and I do know you heard in public comments tonight from a representative of Westgate. I know the Westgate staff really wants to provide some more information to the board, some more specifics about the impact of that program and children. And they have 10 million great reasons why I also would feel integrated services is very impactful because it's at Westgate, but we also have $10 million reasons to consider as a board that could be a cost difference. The only one other thing that I'll put out there right now for you is a reminder that the amazing work that Ryan has done on 1C, again, gives each elementary that 85% capacity, right? So if you were to say, well, let's do 90% capacity, you're probably taking off a classroom at each of those elementary schools, and about $1 million to just over $1 million per classroom, right? Could be a way to say, well, let's take $6 million off of that cost in order to keep integrated services or what have you. Unfortunately for the board, and you've been used to this now, but there's no one perfect answer here. Everything has its pros and cons. So I'll kind of leave it at that, and interested in questions or thoughts the board has at this time.
Yeah, thanks, Brian, for putting up that slide, because that's, I think, what we're going to reference during this discussion. So, Chad, I see you turned on. You want to start us off?
Yeah, I just have a question for Ryan, just to make sure I'm understanding. Obviously, Westgate needs, whether we do full-day kindergarten or not, Westgate needs this. I guess I want to make sure, how are we figuring out that in this conversation? Because having gone to Westgate, it obviously needs additional space because of what's happening there. I don't want the funding to be pending on, you know, this vote and this, that. So how, if worst case scenario, the vote was no, how would we end up funding Westgate? Just making sure that we have that in consideration, because to me, having walked through the halls and seeing it, it really needs, right, to me, that's a priority to make sure that gets on the list of a renovation. So just curious how that would.
Yeah, so then we go back to the capital conversation and go to look at debt service extension base to look at how that would be funded. Again, that would be the renovation portion. We wouldn't have anything included in there at this point. We could relook at that if we could fund that forward, like the gym addition, or if they would need additional classroom space just to continue to support that. But again, the renovations we do have in the 5-year plan, the renovations, but again, the kindergarten is completely separate in this kind of conversation.
That's why I just want to make sure how, understanding all the different pieces of the renovations, okay? And Westgate, that included a gym, right? I mean, based on the renovations that we were drawing,
Yes, in
right?
this, no, not in the renovations.
Not in the renovations.
Not in the the renovations at this point are just taking care of the existing building, so it'd be refreshing the gym, air conditioning the gym, things like that. Finishes throughout the building, plumbing upgrades, lighting upgrades, painting, things like that. But again, no additions, no configuration layout changes, things like that.
But in both of the number one scenarios, there is a gym addition built in. So even if we didn't add 10 classrooms at Westgate, we do have money in there to
In there for
expand the gym.
Correct. And Dryden's the only other one with the gym that I think you had mentioned.
Yes.
Yep, I remember looking at that, I just want to make sure.
Mr. President, if I could speak. You know, I think this is just amazing, right? Our community should be so proud of District 25 for all the research that has gone into this point. Like, we can truly confidently say that as we move forward, you know, and the community knows that so many decisions, so much information, this is all data-driven. So from the public opinion surveys to CASARDA, the demographic study, special services, all of the work that Ryan has put in, and all the budgetary considerations under Dr. Bynes' leadership. So truly, thank you so much to the administration for such a fully thought out and reassuring information, right? That public opinion survey stating how we already know this, we love our district, but how the community appreciates our district. That's really reassuring to hear again and again, right? We want to continue to hear that the good news here. I want to, right off the bat, you know, we have so much to boil down. So right off the bat, when we look at the slide that Brian has put up here, is that in order to boil everything down, can we start by the process of elimination again? Okay, we've heard from the public opinion survey. We heard from, as far as the 5th grade additions at Thomas Middle School getting less, you know, not as much, you know, a lot of concerns about that. Not only did we hear from the public opinion survey, but also from our community via the communications we've received from our parent community. So I'd like to open up to my board to say, should we, let's go process of elimination again, should we knock out number 3, and then therefore we can then focus on what is feasible and best for our district.
Yeah, thanks, Anisha. Do we want to discuss that first, or do we want to go up and down the line? And I see you're on, Rich, and Brian, you had yours on. Do we have any comments on approaching that now?
Yeah, I think what Anisha's pointing out is a valid thought, because one of the reasons we put option 3 out there in the first place was prior to the CASARDA study, where we thought the growth was going to be extreme and therefore concentrate into the middle schools to provide buffer into the middle schools as well as buffer at all the individual schools. I think based on the information that we got just 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I think the impetus for option 3 might be a little bit different. So I'd be supportive of scratching that and focusing our discussions on, you know, the 3 that are left there.
Yeah, I think I was just going to kind of make that general statement that, you know, appreciating the work that we've asked you to do, especially for that scenario, but, you know, we brought it up in conversation, and had we not put a dollar amount to it and had the discussion that we've had to date, you know, I wouldn't have had my arms around it in the first place, not to mention, you know, we got a lot of valuable feedback through email and other correspondence. But as long as I got the microphone, I'll just share that I would not support that option. I think there's even more unrest that would be boiling around the community that we haven't heard already. And, you know, I try to not vote as a parent too often, but, you know, I just thinking of my kids are aged out of that, but, you know, to uproot all those fifth graders and put them in a new building and to put that staff through that, I honestly don't see it being feasible, especially not at an upcharge of, you know, upwards of 15, 20 million in additional dollars. So that's my 2 cents.
Thanks, Brian. So that's 3. Greg?
I'll just add, and echo my colleagues' comments. I think it's good that we did the due diligence, and but I think at this point, I think we have consensus. We should eliminate 3.
Chad?
He's
speaking for you.
To keep this on there? No, I mean, I think there's a couple of things just to address. One, I don't think the intention was ever to put the fifth graders with everybody else. Curriculum was never talked about. This was just strictly space. And I want to be very clear about that. We are just looking at space. I think having Ryan go back and come back with an 85% capacity at all schools was really my goal, because I really wanted to understand. I didn't want to do these additions and come back with 90%, you know, and we're back to at least at 85%. We feel we have room to grow. And what Ryan did coming back with option C, I mean, it's $5 million less. I mean, I know we could talk about the 1, 2, 3, you know, A, B, and C, but I'm just saying I will agree we can remove it. But my goal was really to make sure that we had 85% capacity, and I appreciate you guys doing that for me.
All right, yeah, and I agree. Dr. Biden said, you know, there's no perfect answer, but we have to explore all the options. So we've explored it, and I think consensus is that 3 is off the slide at this point. So now we're just looking at 1, A, B, and C, and with the subsections of I and all that. So, Rich?
Mr. President, Lori, can you, you know, in looking at the options that we have in front of us, can you, and we've heard a little bit about moving the IS program, what's the impact of that? You know, I know obviously there's a dollar impact, obviously, but what's the impact, you know, from a student, parent, you know, all that type of things that is not in the dollars and cents?
Yeah, it's a big impact, right, for all of those reasons. As you heard in public comments, it's been at Westgate for 19 years now. It is our most inclusive instructional program that we currently have in the district in terms of, that's why it's called integrated services. It's students who have special needs in the area of behavior, emotion, and it's built so that those students are integrated with their typical peers as much as they are individually possible or able to do so. And in fact, every integrated services, and correct me, Peg, if I missed something, every integrated services classroom, so currently there's 1 at every grade level, and I think we might even have 2 at first grade currently. Every integrated services automatically has a general education classroom, and we count those students in those general education classrooms. And then they are there for, again, starting their day, any academics. Many of our children in integrated services tend to be academically at grade level. So the teachers then partner with their general education class to provide as much academics in that general education setting as they can, but with the resources that those students need so that they can be successful there. Then they can be back in an integrated services classroom should they need more individual or specialized attention at any time during the day. All of those staff in our integrated services program, plus our administrators, plus at Westgate, very many of our general education staff are trained in crisis prevention intervention. Students may need, again, some CPI assistance throughout the day. And the reason I know that one of our speakers was was referencing that it works so well at Westgate is because together, general education teachers, special education teachers have been trained, have developed this program together. The community knows at Westgate, we have our integrated services program here, and this is part of our school, and this is part of our community. When I've gone to speak at Westgate in the past over enrollment and things like that, families come and talk about, I'm so glad my child is here because he's learning so much about having the integrated services program here in our school. And he's learning to understand, appreciate, care for, be friends with, understand children that might be different than my child might be. Staff who work at Westgate choose to be at Westgate much because of the integrated services program. Not only our special educators, but our general educators who have, again, together learned about and developed a program to have as much inclusion as we see in the district in terms of when children really need some specialized support. The integrated services program is the most inclusive way that we currently offer. We have many, I wish I could have them all here, and we may hear them, families who say, I moved here for the IS program because my children need those supports, but it's in an inclusive environment with staff who are trained and are passionate about this program. So all of that is, like you said, Rich, very well. You may not be able to put a dollar amount on, but truly has a $10 million impact on those children and those families. Now, to be honest with you, can you pick up, right, from a space perspective, can we pick up 8 classrooms and put them in the 8 classrooms at Ivy? From a space perspective, you can. But you're looking at, again, pulling apart a program where a general ed staff has been a part of being trained, developing that program. A lot of support staff would need to go with that program. A new school of staff, while I'm sure would be very welcoming, I'm sure if we went to Ivy Hill, that staff would be very welcoming to an integrated services program, but they'd all need to be trained because the children that are in integrated services can be and should be integrated into general education, but those general education teachers also need the training on how to support them and to keep them in those classrooms. Right, as we've been looking at full-day kindergarten all along, there's always been something that we've been like, oh, but that disrupts that, or that disrupts this. This causes a disruption on our children and our faculty who need the least disruption to maintain the program. But what do you do with 8 classes at Ivy Hill, right? What do you do with 8 empty classrooms? I don't have a perfect answer to that yet, but I definitely have some ideas, right? We know that every year we have at least 45 kids on a waiting list for early childhood. With about 10 kids in a half-day program, there's 2 to 3 classrooms that we could charge tuition for early childhood. We could expand and have a larger preschool program and charge tuition. So from an operating cost, we could make some revenue and serve a community need with those classrooms. That doesn't make up for the construction costs, but it does provide a revenue service. And again, that's just an initial idea, a way of also serving the community and keeping integrated services in a community that's embraced them and been successful with that program.
Jump in. Lori, thank you for that clarification, that explanation, and it's, I think we've talked about this at some point, it's so easy to really dial down into these numbers and stuff, but then this is the moment where we get to talk about those things we really value, and what I hear you saying is it's not just training, it's not just moving classrooms, but the culture, right? And how do we put that dollar value on that? So thank you.
Well, I was going to add, maybe Greg, the same thing what you're saying is that, I think, Lori, you said you could move it, right? And You could retrain the teachers. You could do all those things. We could make a nice spreadsheet, chart it out, do those types of things. I think what impacts the thought on that is that training and that experience that you just said takes 19 takes time. And the part that we don't have is time, right? First grader is only a first grader one time, knock on wood, right? Second grade, third grade, fourth grade, and for us, and you know, a child that needs those special services, there's even a more premium on time. So, you know, that type of shift, you know, not only for the child, but the staff, and you're right, I'm sure Ivy would be welcoming, and, you know, that would be tough. I mean, the parents, yes, everyone would overcome it, but you're talking about a change period of, let's say, 5 years. And is 5 years, you know, is the amount of savings worth the angst when it comes down to, you know, $19 a month or something like that? I think that's a key thing. With that, I maybe, you know, just looking at this and, you know, looking at Chad's thought of the flex capacity, I think that's we've got to have that flex capacity, because you're right, I don't want to go back to the voters and say, hey, here we are again 5 years later and we need more capacity for this, that. You know, who knows, right? The world changes in a year. I'd almost look at it again, you know, based on what Anisha's saying, you know, process of elimination. Do we eliminate 1B and then we're down to, you know, C1 and C2? And maybe based on our discussions that we were just talking about the change, are we really, I know it's you know, it's a costly endeavor, but are we really talking about C1 is probably our best option at this point?
I want to thank Rich for, narrowing our focus here, and that, if I could just build on your comments and maybe entertain a discussion just for a moment about 85%, you know, that 15%, you know, versus 90%. And Dr. Vine, you mentioned, that could be a $6 million swing. That's not nothing. Could we entertain that discussion here? And I think my question, just to make sure, when we talk about that, if we're looking at 1C, is it 1C1, where no program change, right? If we're looking at 1C1, Ryan, when we're looking for that 15% buffer, that's not uniform across all schools, or is? Because like if a school has extra space, it's already there.
So this is looking into the future. This is looking at the section or the classrooms we have available, and then projecting the sections out. So it's just trying to show which rooms we'd have available for extra things. Again, it could be resource, it could be other services, but again, it's looking at the 5 years out into the future.
And Ivy Hill would be the exception there, Greg,
Okay,
I think is what you're referencing, right?
Yes.
Ivy Hill would have more than 85%
so we're not-
capacity until we decided how else we might utilize those spaces.
But that's how you got the 8 overage.
Right.
Okay. The end. I had a follow-up question, but I'll come back to it.
I also think we want to remind ourselves, we have no idea that Ivy's going to continue, because we know with the pandemic, with everything, you could see an influx of suddenly, and we could be, you said the enrollment could be coming in, because my understanding is where the majority of the population may come in, they could be transferring here in April, is what I remember you saying at the last meeting. So truthfully, we could be getting an answer that, hey, we're getting a large influx, or we're getting, so I think it's important that we have that extra capacity as opposed to eliminating capacity, because otherwise we're just putting ourselves behind the eight ball. I think we just need to remember that.
Yeah, Ivy enrollment is definitely the most difficult to project.
I really appreciate my board's comments, and I think as a board, we so appreciate stakeholder input, right? So when Kelly came today and provided all the information to us, and Dr. Vine, when you filled us in on just this incredible culture, and kudos to Westgate for developing this over 19 years, right? And as they say, culture eats strategy for breakfast. It wouldn't, something that's taken 19 years to build, you couldn't give $10 million to build that culture. So I'm totally with my colleagues when they talk about that. What Westgate has developed is unique and beautiful, and it'd be great to hear, from other parents about that. But I feel like the stories may continue to be aligned with what's been shared today. I do want to hear, as far as the NSSEO audit, right, with integrated services. Now, would the audit impact the integrated services program at Westgate, or will it stay the same? How does that all work?
From my perspective, I think that that's going to be a shining star in terms of our inclusive practices in this audit. Yeah.
But
To
that
use it
audit will
as an-
also talk about communications program, foundations program, early childhood,
Correct.
resource, the whole spectrum of programs that we have.
No, thank you for that, because then in my mind, there's just no question, right, that this amazing program needs to continue to stay at Westgate.
I would agree. I think keeping the program at the Westgate makes the most sense. I think if you think about change management and all that perspective, it's going to be $10 million in change management by the time you're done trying to figure out all that. While I get the building costs is at $10 million, but like you're going to have to train staff. That's going to be extra this, and then it's the communications. It's the constant. So in my mind, that $10 million, yes, it's a lot of money from a building perspective, but to your point, Anisha, I think really you're not going to get that back by moving it. It's going to cost you just that much to rebuild that culture. So truthfully, I would rather leave it there and then move on with the other perspective. So, I mean, I know we're trying to eliminate all these opportunities. The one thing that I think that we really should talk about, though, is if we're looking to save cost, right? I understand, Dr. Bynum, I appreciate the tight timeline you want to get for 2023. I really do. I do appreciate that. But I will argue I would rather not spend some of those additional costs up front in the next couple of months. If we're going to spend $2 million to go and get all this information before the referendum, I feel like, in my mind, I would say let's go with the 2024. Let's give us the time to get the referendum. We'll know some of the results. We can, that also gives you a much longer runway to say let's prepare to be done. And then that's also a savings where we're not putting something into something where it's not a sunk cost that we then have to potentially come back to. So my argument would be let's go for 2024, I think, but making a decision in March is the key, and then everything else just starts to go from there.
I would say I'm very comfortable with that, and we still could use 23, 24 for students at risk or what have you. So we could still add some additional, full-day kindergarten for those needs.
Are there any objections to that idea? All right.
No, just support. I mean, I think to build it, it's 3 months from now to June election to ramp up a campaign like this. I think haste makes waste. And definitely, I really appreciate, Dr. Bynum, that you suggested alternatives, because there are a lot of families here who are looking to get their kids into a program in 2023. So, but not wasting the $2 million, not rushing into this June, especially not just because of the June, not just because of this timing of 3 months of ramping up so quickly for a referendum like this in a community that I'm not sure when we last did a referendum. So this, and based on the public opinion surveys, there is going to be a need of community education, right? There's a lot of folks who may be in that undecided category. So that's one thing, but also we haven't seen this June election, so we don't know the turnout. So going to that November, it seems like it's a more time, and Adam and his team of 2 won't be crunching within 3 months to do this.
And Stacy's sharing with me that it was 2005 since the district last did a referendum. Okay.
But either way, we have to, in March, we're gonna take it. Are there any other topics? I know we're going on 2 hours here in open, and then we had a 2-hour closed session. So are there any other topics that we can hash out here and discuss before we kind of make a decision on what we're going to have for next Thursday?
Just maybe adding on to, Greg had brought up the 85% buffer. So one thing to keep in mind, when we last built out in 2015, 16, the intent at that point was that was going to be it, meaning we would have enough buffer in that build to handle the upswing. And again, it's reality happens, and it's a good thing, right? We grew. Reality happens, it's a good thing. So I think it's well worth having that buffer. It's probably good. I mean, it's not that the worms won't go to waste. I mean, good things will happen to those facilities. So I think it's very prudent to keep that in mind. I think maybe, again, I think, Scott, where you're trying to go is, are we at a position, do we have other maybe topics? And I'll leave it back to you to narrow it down somehow.
Yeah, so what I understand, Dr. Bine, is we don't necessarily have to decide on a 1A, 2 tonight, do we? We just have to decide that this is the direction we're going?
Yeah, so I would understand that 1A probably doesn't meet our needs.
And again, I was just using that as an
Yeah,
example.
and and I think that 1B didn't. What I'm taking away from tonight is that we would come back to the board at the next meeting with a recommendation for full-day kindergarten in terms of a 1C1, including leaving current programming at their existing schools. The board could always at that time change that recommendation, but that's what I'm hearing from the discussion seems to be the general interest. Is that correct?
Sorry, go ahead, Greg.
Question for Stacy. We were talking about the debt service extension and the options you said in the future. It's slide 31. And you mentioned less a refund of 2017 debt service. So are we shifting stuff from the debt service extension then to the new referendum? No?
No, one of the things some of the bonds we sold in 2017 are callable in 2026.
Okay.
So if we were going to do a new issue at that time, we would make sure that if it made sense, and it seems like at least some of it does at this point, we would refinance, we'd call those bonds, refinance it, and build it into this to save some of the interest costs.
Okay. Thank you.
So maybe thinking of continuing the discussion, because I think we heard, if I'm hearing right, it says, I think, Chad, you brought up, let's not start any investment in this till after the referendum. And so, but I also heard that maybe, Anisha, you were referring to don't do a June referendum. And so I just want to make sure that that's what we're all here. So is the action, or maybe is the discussion then for a decision in March 17th, one of saying, let's look at the November referendum and start in November with that August 2024 vote? I'm just trying to make sure that's what I heard, and that's where we're leaning.
Chad, I'll say one thing, just because you mentioned it. I'll say one thing, so to put into my June concern, but also maybe not eliminating the June's concern, so you can address that as well, is that I have a clarification question. Another thing to consider, I believe, is this NSSEO audit, right? That cannot happen before June, and the NSSEO audit may have some consequences to all this planning that we're doing, correct? So I'm kind of struggling with this June date. In one way, I know that our community really wants this by 2023, and Ryan, if we did this November election, then kindergarten is a no-go, is that correct, in 2023?
I mean, essentially, unless we'd put some temporary measures in place, then it wouldn't be able to get going until the following year of 24.
Well, and Anisha, I would add for clarification, right? Even we could go on a June referendum for August of 24. We could wait till November for 2024. The issue with the NSSEO audit is, even for the November election, we'd have to file our resolution in August. So we're not going to have a completed NSSEO audit in time for a November election. Right? Then the pros and cons, Rich, I'm glad you asked that question because I wasn't walking away with a clear understanding. Anisha made a good point about the communication for a June referendum is a lot, but if we decide not to do that, then we're only giving ourselves the chance in November.
So I was going to comment on that because I'm like half with you. I think it would be fiscally irresponsible to spend $2.8 million that we might lose if we don't pass a referendum. However, I'm no election expert. So for both of those reasons, I'm not 100% sure if June versus November is the right time to referendum, and I think there's other things we need to weigh in before we make that decision. But I definitely think it would be irresponsible to try to spend money before we got the approval from the
Right.
taxpayers.
Now, the board could, again, tell us, do not spend that money, but we still could get on the June ballot, see if it passes, then spend the money still planning for an August of '24.
I would actually prefer that because there are so many unknowns. It's almost, because if you think about it, if, let's say we lose in November, the next opportunity is April again? April of '23. So then we continue to kick it. I think it's more prudent right now. We have probably some level of, community involvement, desire for this. I think, in laying out your communication plan I'd written down here is we have a high degree of seniors within the community, and so we'd have to make a concerted effort of how do we get to them, because they may not be, definitely not in our schools likely. They may not be at the village hall, they may not be at, the park district, things of that nature where some of it, but in those odd elections, they're the ones that vote, right? They get out there and they vote. So having that opportunity to figure out a messaging to them in June, I think is important. And then who knows? I mean, if there's 2,000 people that turn out and we get 1,001, we're good, right? So there is that opportunity there.
I would agree. I think we should plan for the June, right? Worst case scenario, we go back in November. I think I don't ideally want to get a no, I get that, but I think from a perspective of, to your point, Rich, at the end of the day, the communications, we have to pay to get on the referendum. I don't know all the costs that go into getting on the referendum, and then, all the communication we're gonna have to pay for and everything. We're still gonna have to do something to make it sounds like the website that you were designing and everything like that, so that the public is aware of this. And I think you may get a yes in June. And I think the other thing too is, like, if you look, when is that election? I mean, June, is everybody leaving for vacation once the kids are out of school? I don't know exactly which date it is.
June
So.
28th.
It's the 28th, the Tuesday before the 4th of July.
June before the 4th of July. So pretty much everybody's gone. So, I mean, that's the reality.
There will be early voting, and we have been asked to host a site for that, so we will communicate that information as well.
So truthfully, it's going to be a tough election for anything we try to do that time frame, just reality. But I think it's worth putting it on. I think then if we get a no, we at least know how to wrap up to get ready for November, where, but that's just my perspective.
But we're not going to get a no.
I'm sorry, Brian, you gonna?
Well, yeah, while we're on this topic, because I don't know where you're going, Aisha, let me just interject. I was thinking, as Jim was going through his survey findings and results, great stuff, by the way. I don't know if Jim's still out there, but however, that was only 250 out of, 80,000 some, residents in this town, number one. And number two, while it's incredibly insightful information, we didn't really pose the real question, right? The real question is not just full-time kindergarten. The real question is a $60 million referendum that includes capital expenditures and the sum of, 30 or 40 some odd million for kindergarten.
Yeah, that actually was the sample
Was
legal
it?
question.
Okay,
That's
okay.
the sample legal question. We tried to get as
The long one?
close
Okay.
to what we thought it might really be.
So that's actually good. That was only half of my reservation. What I really wanted to get to was, without bearing expense and putting Jim or anybody else or anymore, I'd like to glean a little bit more, very targeted on that subject. Because as a taxpayer and board member, forget parent for a minute, just as a taxpayer and a board member, a $60 million pill is pretty tough to swallow. And, we're talking about all this communication effort we're gonna have to do and all this education effort we're gonna do. And, we're looking a lot at the expense of kindergarten, but it's not in a silo. It's, it's a really tough decision when you couple it with the capital expenditure that there's not much we can do about. So I guess in a long-winded way, what I'm saying is, you know, we don't have to decide this now, but I'd be very, very supportive of trying to do some additional exploratory public polling, as well as ways to gather feedback from not just our parents, but our taxpayers.
Those are good points, Brian. I want to play devil's advocate a little bit with this, June, and just for clarification, I truly get that we should get on this June ballot, but here's some questions I have to kind of get these voices out. Something that Jim said about, you know, you can't walk back, it's harder to walk back a no vote, right? Like once, say you go to June, and from a public relations perspective, the first time after a long time that District 25 went on a referendum, and if we were rushing, a haste makes waste, and we're rushing in 3 months to get the community ready with education and so forth, and everybody's in Wisconsin at the lake during that time, and we know that seniors vote in higher percentages, and in Arlington Heights that rate is higher for us. I just want to be sure that we're setting us up and our community up for success in a positive light, that if we go June, is there a point, because we're waiting for so much information, we need this NSSEO information possibly, we need other information, so should we just kind of not rush and then just go in November? However, then in the concept of my head is our community really wants a kindergarten by 2023. So I'm kind of weighing those two and wondering about, making sure we're setting ourselves up for success and truly preparing super well so that we know confidently when we go onto that June ballot. I don't think we'll be as confident as if we go into that November ballot, even with turnout.
I hear you, Anisha. Dr. Bine pointed out with early voting, I think the parents will have that grassroots effort where they're going to put the word out. I know the board, if we're passionate about it, we're going to get out there and put the word out. So I think to have that June kind of time where everyone is excited about this, we're excited about it, we're getting the support we want. I like the June election, just to get it while it's hot, not haste, but just while it's a hot topic with everyone. It's something that we're working very hard for. I think maybe in November it's going to I can't see the future. Nobody can see the future, but maybe lose some steam if we do sit on it. And if we do happen to get the no in June, we know where we have to work and what we have to do to improve. And it may ramp up our efforts in that. And that's just, I'd like to take as many bites at the apple as we could.
So there seems to be a lot of building energy around the June ballot. So just for the sake of conversation, if we can go back to the $2-3 million, if the board indicated to go ahead with preparation, right? That money, those fees, that work, if we got a no, is it lost? Would we have to redo it if we come back in November?
It's work that we would still use, but likely, like Ryan said, would need to get edited. So it may not be a complete $2 to $3 million loss of work, but it would be some
substantial.
I think significant loss of work.
I just wonder what the opportunity cost here is. We're talking about a $60 to $80 million project, and we might lose $1 million, maybe, if on a no vote. It's not nothing, but I just want to make sure we entertain this part of the discussion. Like, scope matters. I just would be interested to hear what thoughts are.
Yeah, again, the other part that's a strength to 2024 and having that time, right, is that we really believe we'd be able to deliver all the pieces that need to be delivered, and not be worried about something that could go wrong that would offset our date.
Greg, you bring up a valid point in the grand scheme of things, especially if we feel fairly confident that that time period is going to be, or that we would get a yes vote, looking at that. I look at if we're saying let's go to the June, I'd rather have the entire, district focused on that June versus split, right? And even though, yes, departments can do different things, it's one thing to say, let's be focused on one thing. Still in the background, I'm sure we're getting phone calls, we're talking about it, we're prepping, they're looking at plans going, hey, let's do a second floor here. There's some work, but it's not substantive work, because the main focus is on figuring out what is the right messaging to get out to the community, which is going to involve your staff anyway, to get that out. So that's what I'm kind of thinking of is let's be focused in on that messaging, focusing in on that, and then we can understand. And again, just because I think part of maybe even that thought process getting ready for June would be, what is the amount we're asking for, right? Are we asking for 60? I mean, we could look at, the numbers that were presented here between 32 and 42. We could split the difference, say, let's go 40, right? And we'll make it up in something else. But that's the part of that process that has to be thought of over here over the next time is what's that right magic number to be asking, and let the staff really come up with that so that we're ready for that referendum and ready to put it in there.
So I feel like I have clarity on what to bring back to you at the March meeting. Anybody else on?
But we said June, but not spending the money, correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
That would be probably the recommended motion, what it would include.
Yeah, no, it makes sense, and thanks, Scott, that helped me.
Is there anything further? Well, we have to have our second public comment. So we'll move on to our second public comment. Are there any other submissions for public comment?
Ladies, you're our public.
I would just say thank you for taking the time to listen to what the staff, and I appreciate.
Thank you. I don't know if the mic was on for that, but we appreciate your support.
Mr. President?
Yes, Rich.
Maybe just as our public comment for those that are online, I'd just maybe an offer and an invite to a coffee call this Saturday. Scott and I will be at that coffee call. I don't know, Lori, if you have more details.
Yeah, that's at Patton Elementary School from 8 to 10 a.m. on Saturday.
Sounds good.
Rich is bringing the coffee, right?
I was bringing the coffee.
I'm not sure you want my coffee.
All right, with that, do I have a motion to adjourn? Chad, you were very excited.
I motion we adjourn the meeting.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Anisha. Chad and Anisha, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming out.